Rain-slicked streets blurred under the neon glow of a lonely diner sign. The smell of wet asphalt mixed with old grease from the kitchen, curling into the cold night air. He could hear it before he saw it. The low, plaintive whine of a dog, weak and desperate, slicing through the hum of traffic and the distant wail of a siren. The biker's hands tightened on the handlebars as he slowed, his leather jacket slick with rain. Every instinct screamed to keep moving, but something in that sound froze him in place, anchored like a stone in a river's current. A shadow stirred beneath the flickering street lamp, a tiny body trembling against the curb, ribs pressed painfully against a soaked coat of fur. Hunger, fear, and abandonment radiated from it in waves that made his chest ache. He dismounted, boots hitting puddles with a hollow clack, and crouched down, his voice low and unsteady, barely audible over the rain. "Hey, little one, what happened to you?" The dog lifted its head, eyes wide and raw with a story no human voice could fully translate. The rain had been falling for hours, a relentless drumming on the rooftops and pavements, turning the city into a mirror of blurred reflections and shivering neon. The biker's tires hissed against wet asphalt as he cut through the empty streets, engine growling a lonely rhythm that seemed swallowed by the storm. The air smelled of wet concrete, exhaust fumes, and something more subtle, something like forgotten corners of the city, damp and decaying. Every streetlight flickered erratically, casting uneven pools of amber light that danced across puddles like fragile fire. He should have been alone, should have been anonymous, just another figure swallowed by the rain. But then came the sound, a fragile, rasping whine that sliced through the white noise of the storm. It was soft at first, barely perceptible beneath the roar of the engine, but it carried a rawness that pricked his chest, making the hair on the back of his neck rise. He slowed, tires skimming over slick paint and puddle-strewn asphalt, eyes scanning the street. There, under the trembling yellow glow of a street lamp, he saw it. A dog. Its fur was slicked down with rain, matted into patches where dirt and grime had formed a crust. Ribs protruded sharply, each inhale a painful rattle. Its tail tucked under its frail body, trembling not from cold alone, but from fear, from a history of neglect and abandonment he couldn't begin to imagine. The biker dismounted, leather boots splashing in puddles as he crouched down, careful not to startle it. The dog lifted its head, eyes wide, pupils dilated with terror and a cautious curiosity. Hunger and desperation radiated off it in waves he could feel in his chest, a visceral ache that made him hesitate. He didn't know the dog, didn't know the story of how it came to be here, alone in the rain, but something primal pulled at him, a need to reach across the gap of mistrust. He lowered a hand slowly, trembling slightly, feeling the cold rain seep through his soaked gloves. "Hey, little one," he murmured, voice low, careful not to startle. Each word was measured, deliberate, as if he could build a bridge with nothing but sound. The dog flinched, a soft growl trembling on its lips, but it didn't run. It simply pressed its ears back, eyes fixed on him like flickering candles of both hope and wariness. Reaching into his backpack, he pulled out a crumpled piece of bread, the edges soggy from the rain. Placing it on the pavement near the dog, he shifted back, hands still raised slightly, giving it space. The dog sniffed cautiously, the nose twitching, nostrils flaring as it measured the offering against the shadow of danger it had learned to expect from humans. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, it took a tentative nibble. The biker exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders unwinding just slightly. This was the first small victory, fragile and trembling as much as the dog itself. He stayed there for what felt like hours, rain soaking through his jacket, trickling down his face, pooling in the collar of his shirt. Every movement, every sound mattered. The hiss of tires on wet asphalt, the distant wail of a siren, the soft dripping from fire escapes above. He wanted to speak, to soothe, but words felt meaningless in the face of so much fear. Instead, he offered quiet presence, a steady heartbeat mirrored in his own chest, hoping it would reach the dog in some unspoken way. It sniffed at his boots, eyes flicking up, then darting away when he extended a hand. He didn't push, didn't demand. Trust was not something earned in a single act. He spoke again, softer this time, almost a whisper to the rain itself. "I won't hurt you. I'm not going anywhere." Lightning split the sky, momentarily illuminating the slick streets, casting jagged shadows across the dog's trembling frame. Its ears perked up, eyes reflecting the ephemeral brightness, and then it ducked back down, seeking shelter in its small, soaked body. The biker could feel his own pulse racing. a mix of fear, empathy, and a strange exhilaration that came from standing at the edge of another being's fragile world. He realized with a sharp pang that he was not just witnessing survival, he was being entrusted with it. Hours passed, the storm showing no mercy. Cars passed in sporadic bursts, tires spraying water across the curb, yet the dog remained, hunched and cautious, refusing both complete trust and total retreat. He finally sat down on the wet pavement, legs stretched out, careful not to crowd it. The rain soaked him through, but the cold didn't matter. He had no desire to leave. He began talking quietly, not to the dog, but aloud to break the silence. It's okay. It's okay to be scared. I've been scared too. I know what that feels like. For a brief moment, a curious tilt of the head, a soft whine that was almost a question. The dog had not surrendered, not fully, but it had noticed. And that was the beginning. There was a weight in that acknowledgement, a fragile thread connecting them in the middle of a cold, indifferent night. And for the first time in hours, the biker allowed himself to hope. Eventually, he offered his jacket, laying it on the pavement like a small island of warmth. The dog sniffed it cautiously, then with a hesitant courage, curled partially onto it. He could feel its body trembling against the thin fabric. Yet there was a beginning of trust, as fleeting and delicate as the raindrops dripping from the street lamp above. The biker leaned back on his heels, exhausted but unwilling to move. He had come into the night seeking nothing, yet found a life dangling on the edge of ruin. And somehow, in that dark and wet world, a responsibility settled on him that he could not ignore. He had no plan, no guarantees, only the knowledge that this small creature soaked and trembling had chosen, in its own small, desperate way, to let him stay. And in that choice, the storm seemed to soften, as if even the rain understood the gravity of what was unfolding beneath the flickering lamplight. By the time dawn threatened the edges of the storm clouds, the dog had inched closer, curling into the biker's outstretched legs. Its warmth seeped into him, quiet and insistent. For the first time in a long while, he felt not alone. And though the rain continued, blurring the world into streaks of gray and neon, something had shifted. A story had begun, not just of survival, but of trust and of the fragile, miraculous possibility of connection in a world that often seemed determined to forget such things. The biker stayed there long after the first light, letting the dog rest against him. And in that quiet, rain-soaked street, he silently vowed that he would not turn away. Whatever it took, however long it took, he would see this through. Because sometimes the smallest, most vulnerable life could awaken the strongest part of yourself. And tonight he had glimpsed that truth in the trembling eyes of a dog who had no one else. Days bled into nights with the same muted rhythm, rain puddles, and the faint hum of distant traffic. The dog had not yet given its full trust, but it had chosen to stay close, a hesitant shadow on the fringes of his life. Every approach was measured, every movement a careful negotiation. The biker had come to understand that trust was not granted in leaps, but in increments. The smallest gestures observed and weighed like coins in a ledger of survival. Mornings were the hardest. The dog would retreat to the farthest corner of his modest apartment, curled tight, eyes wary, muscles taut beneath its thin coat. He would kneel on the cold tiles, offering scraps of food or simply sitting silently, letting it assess. Its growl was low, almost imperceptible, but full of meaning. I do not forget. I do not forgive easily. And yet, even in those moments, there were flickers, nose twitches, soft sniffs, tiny steps toward the warmth he offered. Patience became his teacher. He learned to speak softly, not commanding, not pleading, but narrating fragments of his life. Words carried in a tone that promised no harm. I know what it's like to be left. I know what it's like to feel invisible. Sometimes he felt ridiculous, talking to a creature who could not respond in words, but the dog tilted its head as if absorbing the sincerity behind each syllable. Rain tapped relentlessly on the windows, a constant metronome that mirrored the slow cadence of this fragile trust. The streets outside became their practice ground. Short walks just around the block allowed the dog to observe the world cautiously. Every passerby, every sudden sound made it flinch. He learned to anticipate its fears, moving in rhythm with its hesitations, crouching low when cars roared past, letting it investigate scents on the wet asphalt, and rewarding even the smallest acts of bravery with calm words and gentle pats. Progress was not linear. Some days the dog would vanish into shadows. leaving him pacing, heart hammering, chest tight with anxiety. But other days it would nudge against his leg, a feather-light touch that sent warmth flooding through him. The evenings were quieter, intimate in a way the streets could not offer. He would sit on the worn couch reading or tinkering with motorcycle parts, the dog perched at a cautious distance, eyes tracking his movements. There was a wariness in every glance, a fear that something invisible yet immense could strike at any moment. And yet, over time, the gap between them began to shrink, imperceptibly, like frost melting in the morning sun. One night, as the rain drummed softly on the roof, the dog finally approached closer than it ever had. Its movements were tentative, body low, tail tucked but wagging slightly. The biker extended a hand, palm open, fingers shaking from cold and anticipation. The dog sniffed, hesitated, then nudged its nose against him, careful, delicate testing. A shiver ran through its frame, a ripple of vulnerability that mirrored the tremor in his own hands. He whispered almost to himself, "It's okay, you're safe now." Food remained the bridge, a symbol of trust and stability. He would prepare meals carefully, choosing scraps that were familiar yet nourishing. The dog would watch from the shadows, eyes wide, tail flicking, muscles coiled with suspicion, yet hunger often won over fear. Each shared meal, each tiny morsel accepted, became a quiet covenant between them. The world had been cruel, but here, in these small rituals, there was mercy and consistency. Yet frustration was never far behind. Some nights, when the dog retreated completely, refusing to eat or even make contact, he would pace the apartment, muttering in a low voice, "Why won't you let me help you? I'm not going anywhere." The words were half question, half confession, and he realized that in many ways, they were both broken creatures, learning to navigate a world that had shown them little kindness. The dog had scars he could not see, and he had scars he could not touch. Together, they were a tangle of caution and need, each learning to respect the other's boundaries while inching toward connection. The apartment itself began to change subtly. A small blanket was laid in the corner, softened with his jacket, forming a tentative nest. Toys, scavenged from thrift stores or discarded by other humans, were offered. The dog sniffed, batted at them with careful curiosity, then returned to its shadowed distance. Progress was measured in inches, not leaps, and the biker learned to celebrate those inches as though they were miles. Outside, the world remained indifferent. Rain continued to wash the streets, wind howled through alleyways, and neon signs flickered overhead. Each venture out was a test, a negotiation between fear and necessity. Cars screeched, pedestrians shouted, and dogs barked from other homes. Through it all, his companion remained cautious, stepping lightly, ears pricked, muscles coiled, yet slowly acclimating to the presence of a human who did not hit, shout, or chase. The biker mirrored its vigilance, moving with care, observing the smallest cues, a lifted paw, a lowered gaze, a slight whine, and responding with patience rather than frustration. Slowly, something remarkable began to happen. The dog would rest its head against his leg while he sat still tense, but the gesture was deliberate, a calculated act of trust. It would follow him through rooms, sniffing at objects, then retreating to the corner if startled. These moments, fleeting and fragile, carried immense weight. Each tiny act of acceptance was a quiet victory, a testament to resilience and the possibility of connection after trauma. He reflected on his own life during these long nights. Solitude, fear, abandonment, they were not strangers. He saw himself mirrored in the dog, cautious, scarred, yearning for safety, yet afraid of its very existence. In this shared brokenness, a bond formed, silent but potent. There was no dramatic leap, no sudden epiphany, only the slow, deliberate intertwining of two lives navigating the scars of a harsh world. The breakthrough came quietly, without ceremony. One evening, after a day of rain and brief explorations, the dog lingered in the hallway rather than retreating. Its eyes met his, unflinching, and for the first time there was no growl, no hesitation. The biker extended a hand, palm flat, voice soft, almost reverent. "You're safe here, I promise." The dog stepped forward, nudging his fingers, a trembling, cautious bridge between fear and trust. He felt tears prick the corners of his eyes, not of relief alone, but of recognition. For the first time, both of them were truly seen, truly acknowledged. Rain continued to fall outside, a rhythmic hymn to their quiet victories. The world had not changed, but within the walls of that modest apartment, a fragile covenant had been forged. The biker had learned patience, empathy, and humility. The dog had learned, tentatively, that humans could offer more than pain. Each night, as they settled into a shared rhythm, he would whisper softly, recounting fragments of his own life, sharing memories, regrets, hopes, as if teaching the dog that vulnerability could coexist with survival. And in that shared silence, punctuated by the soft drip of rain and the occasional rumble of thunder, trust, fragile, trembling, yet unmistakable, began to bloom. It would take time, more tests, and unforeseen challenges, but the foundations had been laid. Two fractured souls, navigating the fractures of a harsh world, learning slowly, patiently, that connection, however tentative, was possible. Tonight, as the dog curled into a tight ball near his boots, its warmth seeping through the thin blanket, the biker allowed himself to exhale fully. He had glimpsed something rare, the beginning of a bond built not on command, but on respect, patience, and shared vulnerability. The rain whispered against the windows, a steady, soothing reminder that even in a world soaked with fear and uncertainty, trust could take root, and slowly, quietly, it was growing between them. The days grew longer, and the storm that had once defined their nights became a distant echo. The city still pulsed with its indifferent hum, neon flickering and puddles glimmering, but inside the apartment, a quiet rhythm had taken root. The dog, once trembling at every shadow, now lingered closer, its presence a cautious comfort. It did not yet trust fully, but the hesitations that had once defined every movement had softened. The world outside remained loud and chaotic, but within these walls, they were learning to inhabit a space together, a fragile cocoon against the storm. Mornings became their unspoken ritual. He would brew coffee, the rich aroma filling the cramped kitchen, while the dog observed from the corner, ears twitching at each sound. Slowly, it began to approach, sniffing his boots, circling the legs of chairs, and occasionally brushing its side against him, as if testing boundaries. Every movement was a negotiation, a careful dance of respect and curiosity, and with each tentative interaction, a silent bond was being forged. No words, no declarations, only the subtle exchange of presence, of attention, of trust given inch by inch. Outside, the world remained unpredictable. Cars sped past, their tires spraying water across the sidewalks. Strangers barked commands at their own pets. Sudden noises made even the boldest humans jump. Yet the dog, while still cautious, began to navigate these threats with him. It shadowed his steps through puddled streets, sniffing at the air, ears swiveling at every sound. But now it lingered, offering small gestures of comfort, a tail flick, a hesitant nudge against his leg. The biker began to notice how much he had mirrored its caution, how every movement he made had been informed by the dog's responses, and he realized that empathy had become their shared language. At night, they developed routines that were unspoken but sacred. He would sit on the worn couch, hands busy with motorcycle parts or scribbling notes, while the dog would stretch out nearby, muscles tense at first, but gradually relaxing. Occasionally, it would climb onto the edge of the couch, resting a paw on his knee, eyes watching him with an intensity that conveyed both curiosity and trust. He would laugh softly, almost in disbelief at these small victories, the sound startling in the quiet apartment. "You really are something, aren't you?" he murmured, feeling the weight of years of solitude begin to lift. There were moments of humor, too, that became precious rituals. The dog's clumsy attempts to chase shadows or a stray ball across the slick floor were met with gentle encouragement, a shared joy that seemed to thaw the remnants of fear in both of them. In these moments, the biker discovered a lightness he had long forgotten, the ability to be fully present, to laugh without reservation, to experience joy, not as a fleeting distraction, but as a balm to old wounds. And yet, he remained aware of the fragility of this connection. Every gesture of trust could be withdrawn at any moment, every step forward, accompanied by the shadow of regression. The dog, in its own cautious way, began to communicate. A nudge, a whine, a flick of the tail, all became clear signals of intent and need. The biker learned to read them instinctively, responding with patience and care. This silent dialogue deepened their bond in ways words could not capture. He reflected often on the parallels between their lives. Both had been abandoned. Both had learned to survive in worlds that demanded vigilance and self-reliance. And now, slowly, they were teaching each other that vulnerability could coexist with safety, that trust once extended could grow. One evening, after a long day of tentative exploration outside, the dog hesitated at the apartment threshold, ears low, tail tucked. He crouched beside it, voice soft and steady. "It's just us inside, nothing to fear." Slowly, it stepped forward, brushing against his arm before settling near his feet. He exhaled, a deep shuddering release that carried months of tension, and for the first time, he allowed himself to feel that fragile, budding love. The dog's presence was no longer a reminder of responsibility alone. It was a source of comfort, a mirror to the quiet healing that had begun within him. Their nights were filled with quiet companionship. Rain might fall outside, or traffic roar, or neighbors shout, but within the apartment, a delicate peace had taken hold. The dog would rest its head against his leg, eyes half closed, a small sigh escaping its lips, a sound that resonated deeply in the biker's chest. He often found himself tracing the contours of its fur, feeling the warmth seep into his fingers, grounding him in the present. Every subtle gesture, every flicker of acknowledgement, became a testament to the silent bonds they had built together. The world beyond their walls remained complex and threatening, yet the lessons they were learning inside, the patience, the attentiveness, the quiet endurance, prepared them for what was to come. Each cautious step, each tentative interaction was a rehearsal for the larger trials ahead. They were building a foundation of trust that would not bend under the weight of crisis, a reservoir of resilience that neither had anticipated, but both desperately needed. Even mundane activities became significant markers of progress. Meals were shared with calm rituals. Walks through rain-slicked streets were met with growing confidence, and nights ended with the dog curling beside him, finally allowing the warmth of connection to override instinctual fear. Humor, tenderness, and mutual understanding began to weave through the fabric of their days. They were no longer merely surviving side by side. They were coexisting, learning the contours of each other's worlds, and slowly, cautiously becoming indispensable to one another. He reflected often on the transformations he witnessed. The dog had moved from trembling, cautious survival to tentative engagement, and he had moved from solitary detachment to a deep, tender investment in another life. The shared experience of vulnerability had forged an unspoken covenant, a silent promise of protection, patience, and respect. It was fragile, and he knew setbacks were inevitable, but the growth they had achieved together was undeniable. On a particularly quiet night, the dog pressed its nose against his hand for an extended moment, eyes meeting his in a gaze that conveyed understanding, trust, and something approaching affection. He whispered softly, voice choked with emotion, "You're not alone anymore, and I'm not going anywhere." Outside, the rain pattered gently against the windows, a soothing counterpoint to the intensity of the moment. The world beyond remained chaotic and unpredictable, but inside there was a delicate equilibrium, a shared sanctuary born of patience, empathy, and the resilience of two fractured beings learning to heal together. In that small apartment, amid the soft hum of streetlights and the distant rumble of the city, a quiet bond had been solidified. It was not grand or declarative. It was woven from thousands of tiny, intentional moments, a gentle touch, a patient word, a shared meal, a cautious nudge. These moments, repeated and reinforced, had created a silent language, one that required no words but spoke volumes about trust, loyalty, and the power of connection. As the night deepened, the dog settled into a comfortable posture, body relaxed against his leg, breathing even and calm. The biker, feeling the rhythm of its chest against his own, allowed himself to sink into the stillness, absorbing the weight and warmth of this fragile but undeniable companionship. Trust had been given in increments, tested, nurtured, and now it had taken root. And though the future held uncertainties, both understood, in the quiet, that they would face whatever came next together, bound not by necessity alone, but by a silent, unbreakable bond. The rain returned with a ferocity that seemed almost deliberate, drumming against rooftops and asphalt with a deafening insistence. Streets turned to rivers, overflowing gutters sending slick waves across sidewalks. The neon reflections of signs shimmered violently in the water, fractured and distorted, as though the world itself were trembling. The biker had grown accustomed to the rhythm of this city, to its indifference and its unpredictability, but tonight the storm carried an urgency he had not felt before. The dog, once cautious, now followed closely, though its pace was erratic, steps uncertain on the slippery streets. Hunger gnawed at it relentlessly, an instinctual pull that could not be denied. In its desperation, it sniffed at the edge of a gutter, drawing closer to something unseen. The biker's heart sank as he realized what was happening too late. The dog had consumed a piece of something toxic, a small fragment of garbage coated with decay and chemical sharpness. Its body stiffened almost instantly, trembling violently, eyes glazing with fear and confusion. No. No, stay with me," he shouted, his voice nearly lost in the roar of the storm. He dropped to his knees, scooping the dog up into his arms, its small, fragile frame trembling against his chest. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him, heavier than any gear, heavier than any burden he had carried on his solitary rides. He ran through the flooded streets, boots slipping, water spraying around him, the dog whimpering softly, its fragile body racked with shivers. Every heartbeat felt like a countdown, every step a desperate plea for salvation. Cars honked, headlights cutting through the rain in jagged beams, and pedestrians yelled from their windows, but he barely noticed them. Nothing existed beyond the small bundle in his arms, beyond the ragged whines and shallow, panicked breaths of a life hanging in the balance. The city, normally indifferent, had become an obstacle course, each puddle and slick curb a threat to the fragile connection between him and the dog. And yet, amidst the chaos, he felt an unwavering determination harden inside him. He would not fail this creature. He could not. Finally, drenched and exhausted, he reached the vet's clinic, its light spilling warmth onto the slick streets. He burst through the doors, voice breaking as he pleaded for help, rainwater streaming down his face. Nurses and veterinarians rushed to intercept him, taking the dog with gentle but urgent hands. He could do nothing but pace the waiting area, knees aching, heart hammering, mind racing with images of loss and abandonment. The storm outside continued unabated, a relentless mirror to the panic and helplessness clawing at him from within. Hours stretched into an eternity. He could hear the soft beeps of monitors, the faint rustle of medical equipment, the occasional murmur of the staff, but his world had shrunk to a single room, a single life suspended in uncertainty. He traced invisible patterns across the floor with his soaked boots, muttering apologies, promises, and confessions. "I'm so sorry. I should have been faster. Stay with me. Please stay with me." His hands twisted the hem of his soaked jacket, nails biting into the fabric as anxiety tightened around him like a vice. When the vet finally emerged, exhaustion etched into his face, but with a glimmer of hope in his eyes, the biker felt a wave of relief crash through him. The dog was stable, injured but alive. It had fought, and now he had a second chance to honor the trust that had been so tentatively extended. He knelt beside the small cage where it rested, its breathing shallow but steady, fur damp and matted, eyes blinking in slow, tentative acknowledgement. He whispered, voice breaking with both relief and raw emotion, "You made it. You're going to be okay." The storm outside began to abate, rain tapering into steady drizzle, and the first hints of dawn tinged the horizon. He watched the light filter through the clinic's windows, illuminating the small form of the dog with an almost sacred glow. Every shallow breath it took seemed monumental, every flicker of its eyes a victory against a world that had been cruel and unyielding. And as he sat beside it, hand resting lightly on its chest, he realized that survival was not merely about endurance, but about presence, about unwavering commitment when the odds were stacked impossibly against you. The ride home was quiet, the city still slick with rain, but the tension that had clawed at him all night had softened into a meditative vigilance. The dog rested in his lap, eyes half closed, trusting him in a way it had never done before. He could feel its heartbeat against his hands, weak but resilient, and with each pulse came a sense of responsibility that was both terrifying and sacred. He vowed silently but firmly that he would never allow it to face such danger alone again. Back in the apartment, the dog was immediately placed on a warm blanket, towels carefully wrapped around its shivering body. The biker moved with precision and care, guided by a mixture of instinct and desperation, preparing water, arranging food in small, safe portions, and whispering softly words of reassurance. "We're safe now. No one will hurt you again, I promise." Its eyes, once fearful and distant, now lingered on his face with fragile recognition, a tentative acknowledgement of their shared ordeal. Night fell again, and the storm had become a memory in the patter of gentle rain. The dog lay curled against the blanket, body still trembling occasionally, but alive, breathing steadily, and beginning to relax. The biker watched over it, feeling a quiet, profound gratitude. He understood, in a way he had never fully grasped before, that love and trust were not guarantees. They were choices made in the face of fear, deliberate acts of courage that demanded persistence, patience, and unwavering presence. The events of the night had shifted something deep within him. Fear had been replaced by vigilance, helplessness by determination, and a quiet bond had been cemented through shared struggle. The dog, once fractured and wary, now leaned against him, small paws resting on his knee, eyes reflecting both lingering fear and emerging trust. He whispered gently, fingers tracing its damp fur, "We survived this, together." Outside, the city had returned to its usual rhythm, indifferent and relentless, but inside, a sanctuary had been forged in the aftermath of chaos. The storm had tested them, pushed them to the edge of fear and despair, but it had also revealed the depth of their connection, the resilience of their bond, and the profound beauty of life preserved through care and courage. In that quiet apartment, with the rain soft against the windows and the dog finally resting in tentative peace, the biker allowed himself to believe in the possibility of healing, of growth, and of the extraordinary strength that could emerge from shared struggle. He knew that challenges remained ahead, but for the first time he felt ready, not just to survive, but to thrive, side by side with a creature who had entrusted him with its life. And as the first light of dawn broke across the horizon, painting the rain-slicked streets in shades of gold and pink, he understood a truth both simple and profound. Love, even when tentative, even when born in fear, could endure storms that seemed insurmountable, and in that endurance, life could find its most luminous. Fragile Vic morning light seeped softly through the thin curtains, dust motes dancing in golden beams across the small apartment. For the first time in weeks, the air felt calm, warm, and forgiving, a stark contrast to the relentless storms and uncertainty that had defined their nights. The dog, once trembling and wary, now rested comfortably on a soft blanket, paws curled under its chest, eyes half closed in tentative relaxation. It exhaled slowly, evenly, a rhythm that seemed to resonate with the slow, steady heartbeat of the biker as he sat nearby, hands folded loosely over his knees, watching with quiet awe. The transformation was remarkable, not only in the dog, but within himself. He had come into the city, alone, hardened by years of solitude and the relentless noise of a world indifferent to suffering. Yet in the gentle, patient acts of care, feeding, soothing, guiding, waiting, he had discovered a reservoir of tenderness within himself that had long lain dormant. The bond they had forged through fear, patience, and survival now hummed softly between them, silent but undeniable. Breakfast became a ritual of connection. He prepared small portions of food, carefully chosen for both nutrition and safety, placing them in shallow dishes that the dog could approach without hesitation. Its tail flicked slightly, a small, cautious gesture that was now more habitual than fearful. Full. Each bite taken without hesitation was a testament to the trust they had nurtured, a quiet affirmation that the world need not always be cruel. The biker spoke softly as he worked, recounting small stories of the past week, of small victories and setbacks, of moments that had seemed insurmountable at the time but had been weathered together. Their walks became slow, deliberate explorations of the neighborhood. The dog no longer lagged behind, no longer flinched at every passing shadow. It moved beside him with a tentative confidence, sniffing at the wet asphalt and puddles, ears flicking alertly, tail relaxed but poised. Cars sped past. Strangers walked by with hurried glances, but the dog's steps remained steady, guided by the subtle cues and protective presence of the biker. Each confident stride was a milestone, each pause for observation, a celebration of resilience and cautious curiosity. Inside the apartment, routines had softened into intimacy. The dog had taken to curling up near him on the couch during quiet nights, occasionally pressing its head against his shoulder, or resting a paw lightly on his knee. The warmth, once a source of fear or suspicion, was now welcomed and reciprocated. The biker often traced his fingers along its damp fur, feeling the pulse of life, the subtle tremors that reminded him of fragility, and the strength that emerged from survival. In these small, tender gestures, a profound emotional dialogue unfolded. requiring no words, only presence, understanding, and care. Humor had found its way into their lives as well. The dog's playful antics, chasing leaves blown in from the open window, tripping over its own paws, barking at imaginary threats, elicited laughter that rang true and unguarded from the biker. The sound of it surprised him each time, a reminder that joy could exist alongside struggle, that connection could bloom even in spaces once defined by fear and isolation. Together, they discovered that trust was not only about survival, but also about the freedom to express life's simplest pleasures without hesitation. One afternoon, the biker paused to reflect, watching the dog sniff the edges of the living room, ears twitching at distant noises, tail wagging gently. He realized that their journey had been less about teaching and more about learning patience, resilience, empathy, and the quiet power of presence. Each challenge, each fearful glance, each hesitant nudge had been an opportunity to grow, to understand the language of trust in its most elemental form. The dog had taught him vulnerability, and he had taught it safety, and together they had built a bond that was more than survival. It was life reclaimed. Outside, the city continued its ceaseless rhythm. Traffic roared, voices echoed, sirens wove in and out of the streets, but the apartment remained a sanctuary. The dog padded to the window, nose pressed lightly against the glass, watching the wet streets below. He approached silently, resting a hand on its back, feeling the warmth and steady pulse beneath his fingers. "We've come a long way," he whispered. The dog lifted its eyes to meet his, a slow, steady gaze that conveyed understanding, recognition, and a quiet, unspoken affection. The world beyond remained unpredictable and often harsh, yet inside these walls, a fragile equilibrium had been achieved. Trust, once tentative and hesitant, now radiated in small gestures, a nudge, a wag, a relaxed posture. The biker realized that the bond they shared was not forged in perfection or ease, but in patience, in persistence, and in the courage to remain present even in the face of fear and uncertainty. Each day, each moment, became a reaffirmation of this bond, a quiet celebration of life endured and nurtured. Evenings were marked by quiet companionship. The rain, occasional but gentle now, tapped softly against the windows, providing a soothing background to their shared moments of rest. The dog would curl into his lap or lean against his leg, allowing warmth and trust to coexist in a delicate balance. He would speak softly, recounting fragments of his own past, small confessions, lessons learned, and hopes for the future. The dog listened with silent attention, eyes tracking his movements, a companion in every sense of the word. As the weeks passed, their bond deepened, solidified by consistency, care, and shared experience. The dog no longer flinched at sudden sounds, no longer hesitated at human contact, no longer approached food with suspicion. In turn, the biker felt a shift within himself, a softening of the edges carved by years of isolation and fear. He laughed more, paused more, and allowed himself to feel the profound joy of connection, the quiet, tender victory of two lives finding each other in a world often defined by neglect and indifference. The culmination of their journey was subtle yet profound. One morning, as sunlight spilled across the rain-washed streets outside, the dog trotted alongside him on the sidewalk, tail high, ears alert, eyes bright. It paused periodically to glance at him, a silent affirmation that he was still there, still present, still committed. In that moment, he understood fully the meaning of their shared ordeal. Trust had been earned through struggle, nurtured by patience, and solidified through the quiet persistence of presence. Returning home, they settled into a comfortable rhythm, the apartment filled with the warmth of life, laughter, and the quiet contentment of companionship. The dog rested at his feet, occasionally lifting its head to meet his gaze, a silent dialogue of recognition, love, and shared history. He traced its fur absently, feeling the pulse of life beneath his fingers, and allowed himself a deep, unguarded exhale. Their story, once defined by fear and survival, had evolved into one of trust, resilience, and the quiet poetry of connection. In the soft light of morning, he whispered, almost to himself, "We made it together." And the dog, curled gently at his feet, seemed to reply not with words, but with presence, trust, and the profound simplicity of a life reclaimed. Outside, the city carried on, indifferent and unrelenting, but inside, a sanctuary had been forged. Trust had grown, fear had softened, and love, tentative, fragile, yet enduring, had found a home. And in that quiet, rain-washed apartment, With sunlight spilling over two lives intertwined, the biker understood a truth that transcended words, that even in a world marked by fear, neglect, and uncertainty, trust and love could endure. It could flourish in the small moments, the shared meals, the gentle touches, the patient wait for a trembling life to take its first brave steps toward connection. And sometimes it was in the simplest gestures, the nudge of a nose, the press of a paw, that the deepest, most enduring victories of the heart were found. Tori.